Welcome back to this week's episode of the Making Media podcast. Today we're going to be talking about film. Now, if you've been keeping up with the show so far, or at least watched the introduction episode, you may remember me specifically saying that I did not want this to become a podcast where I just talk about movies. However, I do think that there are aspects of film that are important to the things we consume. There could be episodes of the writing in films, or directorial styles, or cinematography, or like today's episode, special effects. In this episode, we're going to be talking about movie effects, and to do that, I'll be using one of my favorite movies as an example, Jurassic Park. But first, a little bit of background about the film. In 1990, author Michael Crichton wrote the novel Jurassic Park. Crichton had been a science fiction author for decades at this point, writing novels like The Andromeda Strain and Congo that were successful, and Jurassic Park was no different, garnering studio attention before the novel was even published. 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, and Columbia Pictures all fought for the rights to make the film adaptation, but Universal Studios won them for Steven Spielberg, who gained interest in the project while working with Crichton a year earlier. Spielberg liked the idea of a sort of spiritual successor to Jaws, a man versus nature type story, this time on land. Pre-production began almost immediately after Universal acquired the rights, and after 2 years of planning, writing, casting, and designing, filming shortly followed. And a few short months after that, shooting wrapped. Just days later, a rough cut of the film was finished, so Spielberg could move on to filming his next production, Schindler's List. Jurassic Park was released in 1993, at a time where the effects in a film were a large draw, and could make or break the movie. Steven Spielberg knew this, and had been utilizing it for years with films like Jaws, E.T., Indiana Jones, and more. Spielberg's use of special effects is one of the many reasons his films are so successful, and for Jurassic Park it was no different. Once again, Spielberg succeeds with his combination of both practical and visual effects. Jurassic Park made the impossible possible, bringing these prehistoric creatures to life and wowing audiences even today. But we'll get more into that after the break. Welcome back. Now, if you'll remember, the topic of this episode is about special effects, both visual and practical, and Jurassic Park is just one example of those. So let's go ahead and dig a little deeper into how it used them, starting with the practical side of things. Now, I chose Jurassic Park to talk about because of its groundbreaking use of effects at the time it was made. It did this using both practical and visual effects. Practical effects are the special effects that are made during a production. This can be a plethora of things. Blood squibs and ammo blanks for combat or gunfight scenes, explosions or collapsing environments for building destruction, stunt performers and harness rigs for intense movement and choreography, and, in the case of Jurassic Park, animatronics, puppets, and interactive costume pieces, which were used to bring the dinosaurs to life on a big screen. Practical effects like these were definitely not something new when it came to filmmaking, so when Steven Spielberg decided to utilize them for Jurassic Park, he was looking for the best of the best. Originally, Spielberg wanted a man named Bob Gurr to create all of the dinosaurs as animatronics. Gurr was a Disneyland Imagineer as well as a designer for other theme park attractions at Universal Studios, so he had the experience working with animatronics. Creating life-size dinosaur animatronics for all of the different dinosaurs in the film was deemed expensive and impractical. However, the idea adapted to more. At the time, the best guy in Hollywood for the job was a man named Steve Winston, a king of practical effects. Winston was responsible for many of the iconic creatures and machines that defined that era of film, as well as the science fiction genre as a whole, helping with the special effects on movies like The Thing, The Terminator, Batman, Alien, and more, even as recently as Iron Man. Winston is an icon of film and special effects, and chances are you know a lot of his work. So if you're at all interested in any of what we're about to talk about, I highly encourage you to look more into him and his work. You can find a lot of behind-the-scenes footage and commentary on the Stan Winston School YouTube channel or at stanwinstonschool.com. Out of the dozens of dinosaurs in the original movie, there were over 15 minutes of screen time featuring them, and the majority of this was done using practical effects. So let's take a look at how they did it. Now, there's nothing really like dinosaurs nowadays, except for maybe lizards or birds, but even so, they could not compare in size to what these prehistoric animals are. So I'm going to try and describe each of these dinosaurs to you in case you aren't well acquainted with the different names or types of creatures. But don't be afraid to look it up if you still can't get a picture. Let's begin with the Triceratops. Now this one a lot of people know. The Triceratops was a large cow-like creature similar to a rhinoceros, but obviously more lizard-like, which featured 3 horns and a crest protruding from its head and face. Jurassic Park featured a scene with a sick Triceratops slumped over prone on the ground, drawing in labored breaths. The Triceratops, like most of these creatures we go over, was a puppeted animatronic, with movements controlled by performers with the aid of machinery. Luckily, the sick animal was lying on the ground, which means 1, there's not a whole lot of movement. They aren't making an animal the size of a small elephant walk around, just movement of the head, neck, legs, and the swelling of the chest as it breathes. And 2, the dinosaur being on the ground means they can control it from underneath. The scene was filmed with puppeteers controlling the movements from inside a pit that was dug beneath the beast, using cables and levers to achieve motion. The only thing not physically controlled was the blinking of the creature's eye, which was radio controlled with a remote. The next creature is the Dilophosaurus. The Dilophosaurus is the small, much more lizard-like creature, with a large expanding frill around its face and a dangerous venom it shoots out of its throat. At least for the movies it was. While these aspects were not necessarily faithful to the real-life creature, it sure does make a good on-screen villain. Being the size of a medium to large dog but walking on its hind legs, and obviously a lizard, the Dilophosaurus was created as a puppet, once again controlled by artists underneath the creature. In the scene, the small beast attacked one of the park employees, popping open its frills and dousing them with an acidic goo before going in to feast. Everything about the creature, from its walking and breathing to frills and spit, even the flick of the tongue, was controlled by the puppeteers below. The Brachiosaurus is the next dino on our list, and though hardly of its body was featured, it was just as much of a job for the team creating it. The scene in the film features the protagonists high up in a tree that the large herbivore decides to snack on. The 40-foot-tall giraffe-like dinosaur could obviously not be fully made as a puppet or animatronic, so the scene featured just the upper bit of the creature's neck and head. Stan Winston wanted the gentle giant to be seen as docile, as it is just a plant eater, so the movement of this puppet was not so demanding. Blinking, swaying, and chewing on leaves was the only action necessary for the creature, based around the movement of a cow chewing cud. This puppet featured none of the hydraulic power that many of the others had, and instead took a team of 6 to create the small, slow movements that brought the animal to life. Next up is a big one, the Velociraptor. Though not physically large, raptors were one of the main antagonists of the film and were featured in a few different scenes. But the big one is the attack in the kitchen. While some of the scenes with the raptors were computer animated, a much larger amount of the shots featured performers in costumes. Unlike the other creatures we've gone over so far, the raptors were not animatronic, but instead a suit that was worn, with the puppeteer controlling movements of the head, neck, eyes, and tail from within. Despite seeming like a much goofier idea than a robot or a machine, the raptor costumes created some of the most realistic, terrifying, and memorable moments of the film. Finally, we have our last dinosaur, which Spielberg himself regarded as the star of the movie, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. I'm not going to describe the T-Rex to you because how could you not know what a T-Rex is? It's the dinosaur, largely in part because of the movie. Being largely featured in what might be the biggest, most memorable scene in Jurassic Park, the T-Rex was created as a life-sized animatronic creature. Using hydraulics, the team brought this creature to life with all of its smashing, stomping, gnashing, and roaring that the real beast would have. Only one problem. The heavy downpour of the scene means that the animatronic would get wet. This is not ideal, because the already 12,000-pound machine was also now soaking wet with water. The team did everything to work around this, hand-drying the beast with towels between takes to complete the job, which they did, and terrifically too. So what makes these puppets so special? The thing about these creations is that they were almost real animals. The attention to detail that went into making these creatures made people genuinely fear for their lives in theaters. Everything was thought of and designed to make the animals lifelike, from the texture of the skin and anatomy of the creature to their movements. The puppeteers expertly controlled the animals, their walking patterns, jerky, bird-like tendencies, and even breathing and blinking. People thought they were real dinosaurs right in front of them, which helped the film be the huge success that it is. When we come back, we'll look more into the digital work done to create these animals. So we'll see you after the break. Welcome back. We are now going to take a look into another aspect of what brought dinosaurs to our screens, something that we almost take for granted with its use today, but was groundbreaking in 1993. Visual effects. Originally, Spielberg had planned for many of the dinosaurs to be featured as stop-motion animation, as, like we had already stated, they could not make animatronics or puppets for every dinosaur the size of a 4-story building. Spielberg brought in visual effect producer Phil Tippett. Prior to this, Tippett did animation and stop-motion work for films like Star Wars and RoboCop, but was now branching into new territory as the industry evolved. For the first time in his career, and one of the pioneering uses in film, Tippett created dinosaurs for Jurassic Park using computer-generated imagery, which you may know as CGI. The team developed a machine that they could arrange like a stop-motion puppet. This machine featured motion encoders that would translate the physical arrangement to a digital 3D model, bridging the gap between the work that had been done for decades and the new computer language of today. Shots using these effects were obviously those featuring larger dinosaurs, like certain full-body shots of the T-Rex in the iconic Welcome to Jurassic Park scene, where the main cast arrives and sees the Brachiosauruses grazing for the first time. In addition to this, smaller creatures like the Gallimimus and Velociraptor were also animated for certain scenes, as well as environmental effects and even replacing a stunt double's face with the actors. Visual effects are something we see in almost every movie today and even take for granted. While Jurassic Park was certainly not the first to utilize them, it is definitely one of the best. But why is this? There's a certain harmony between practical and visual effects that help to make a movie good, and Jurassic Park was a prime example of this. Fully practical effects are basically impossible, with certain productions given the size or expansiveness of what is trying to be achieved. Obviously, a film set in space could not just take a rocket up and film in the stratosphere. But a movie utilizing entirely visual effects is not ideal either. Many critics nowadays specifically hate the use of an entirely blue-screened movie, especially if done poorly. It is the balance between the use of practical and visual effects that is key to creating stories, environments, and worlds beyond that of our own. That balance is used in many of the biggest and best films of all time. The Matrix used practical effects to create clones and special effects to dodge bullets. Titanic combined the two to recreate the most famous ship sinking in history. Even as recent as last month's Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves used special effects to create magic, and practical effects with insane costumes and puppets to create mythical fantasy creatures. Puppetry is a whole other genre of talent that maybe we could fill a whole episode with in the future. Aside from the balance between practical and visual effects, what made Jurassic Park so special was just how well they did it. Jurassic Park wowed audiences with its effects, both practical and visual. Neither, however, were particularly anything new. As we've covered, techniques used in Jurassic Park had been done before. What was shocking was just how much Jurassic Park advanced upon them, making it seem real enough for people to be shocked at dinosaurs right there in front of them, even by today's standards. It shows that we can make anything happen on screen, and we can make it look good. If this was possible 30 years ago, it is even more so today. In film today, there's a much larger focus on quantity over quality that existed much less back then. If more people would focus on the quality of production, who knows what we could make. Overall, effects have played a significant role in shaping the film industry and the way audiences experience movies. While they may not be the most important aspect of a film, they can certainly enhance the storytelling and bring a filmmaker's vision to life in ways that were once thought impossible. That wraps up today's episode of the Making Media Podcast. If you have any questions or things you'd like to share, remember to reach out at our Twitter, @MakingMediaShow. If you enjoyed this, be sure to share and check out our other episodes, and like, follow, or subscribe on whatever platform you're using to keep up to date on our shows as they come out. Thanks for listening to the Making Media podcast, and I'll see you in the next one.